what led you to be interested in the canals?
Okay, well, working on the Miami-Erie Canal, we were, basically our mission was to control the hydraulics. And with the hydraulics, we were drawing water out of Grand Lake St. Mary's down a 3 mile feeder and then into the main body of the canal system. And with that, you had to maintain all the hydraulic control structures, and so you had to deal with historical structures. And so that all became part of your job, not only just the hydraulics, but the historical aspect of it. When you were working around structures or the canal system itself, there was always that aspect. How do we upgrade? How do we work around a historical structure? So it was just incumbent upon you to be interested or have in your mind constantly that you were dealing with the historical aspect of the canal and how to work around that and do your day-to-day jobs without changing any kind of historical aspect of the canal system.
Okay, so how would you summarize the challenges of the building of the canals?
That's a great question. The canal system itself, canal building goes clear back to the pharaohs and their dynasty in Egypt, clear through the Roman Empire, all the way up through Europe, and then migrated into the United States. So building of canals aren't something new. But as canals were built on the eastern part of the United States and moved to the west and into Ohio, there were a lot of improvements that they made. So some of their challenges were you always had to have a supply of water. And that supply was pretty simple in Ohio because Ohio is rich with water. A lot of times the canal system was built right along a major river. To the south, it was the Great Miami. To the north, it was the Maumee. And locally, the St. Mary's River and the Auglaize River. So what do we know about rivers? We know rivers always are flowing downstream.
Right.
So you always have fault. And so the canal followed the courses of these rivers. And a river will always go to a larger body. So if that river is depositing into a larger body of water, which is your destination to go to, which is the Ohio River at Cincinnati and Toledo at Lake Erie, you just follow the course of the river, and you knew you always had grade, and you were always going to go to your destination, which was Lake Erie and the Ohio River. To me, the biggest challenge was right here locally in our area. It seems like we're in flat ground here, but in actuality, we're in a high part of the state. We're actually 512 feet above the Ohio River.
Right.
So the challenge was, how do we get water on top of a 512-foot hill?
Right.
We don't have any major rivers here that we could dam up or what have you, to draw water out of. So the challenge was, how do you get water on top of this 512-foot hill? To meet that challenge, they built 3 reservoirs. One is, all 3 of them are now state parks. But the one to the south was Lake Huarmey, and that fed the summit. And the summit was from New Bremen all the way down to Lockington. So, and then Indian Lake, which was originally Lewistown Reservoir, was built to feed water to the south of the summit, so from Lockington south. And Grand Lake St. Mary's, our most famous lake for being one of the largest man-made inland lakes in the world at that time without using mechanical needs. That feeds everything to the north. So that to me was the biggest challenge, putting water on top of the 512-foot and then you had to hold that water in place. So you had to build locks to hold a minimum of 4 foot water depth, 40 feet wide, so two canal boats could pass each other. Now, it could be a lot deeper. It could be 10 feet deep or deeper, but it had to be that minimum 4 feet and 40 feet wide. It could be a lot wider. In places it's 100 feet wide or wider. So that was a huge challenge. You had to divert. In St. Mary's area, they actually diverted the St. Mary's River over so they could build and incorporate the canal system through that contour of land.
Okay, so how would you think, how would the history of Augusta County be different if we did not have canals?
When I talk about canals, most people, I say, what do you think of when I talk about the Miami-Erie Canal? And they'll basically, they think of a waterway with a boat with people on it. But the canal system is so much more than that. Not only did it bring people in and out of the community, it brought product in and out of the community with a cargo boat, or it brought freight. It shipped freight in, shipped freight out. So if you were a businessman or if you were a farmer, how did you get your product or your wheat or corn or whatever in and out of your town? You shipped it by canal boat. How did you get your mail in and out of town? It came by canal boat.
Right.
How did you communicate with other communities? You took the canal boat. Okay. The canal was basically its own internet of today. And what I mean by that, so say you were in New Bremen and you were a canal boat captain and you were going to take a trip to Defiance. And as you went along, you went up to Otterville and you found out that the lock in Otterville was broken down. So you couldn't go on up to Defiance. So you turned around, and as you went back through the communities, Delphos, Spencerville, St. Mary's, New Bremen, you would relate that to everybody. Hey, if you're taking the canal and you're going north, you can't go through Otterville because the locks broke down. So it was a level of communications. At each lock, that lock was there to hold amount of water back. And it may be 6, 8 feet of water. That's a lot of water head pressure. So a lot of industry would put a water wheel next to the canal, and they would use that power, that water drop in elevation, and use that water power to drive the water wheel, which drove their equipment and industry. The canal also was a water supply. So if your industry or your product, whatever you were using that needed water, you drew water right out of the Miami-Erie Canal, whether it was for whatever you were making or for irrigation, whatever. So it was water supply. And it also was so much more than just communication. The towpath where the mules walked that towed the canal boats, it was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you needed to go from point A to point B to the next community or what have you, you just took the towpath. It didn't cost you a dime. Okay? Water was a resource, but it was also a source of recreation. Okay? And it also, if you needed fire protection, where'd you get your water? You just pulled it right out of the Miami-Erie Canal. It was a ready resource right there for you. So the canal system was so much more than just a canal boat with people in it.
Right. In this day and age, if need be, do you think any of these canal systems would be able to be operative? Like, we could use them?
Well, the canals never actually went out of business.
Okay.
So we're still drawing water out of Grand Lake St. Mary's, and we're running it down at that 3-mile feeder and feeding everything into the canal system going clear north up through Delphos. And there is still that water resource there. people, the state can still sell water out of the Miami Erie Canal. Up until recent years, we were feeding water to the St. Mary's Power Plant for cooling. So, it's still operational, it's just evolved, it's not a transportation route anymore, it's more of a recreational area, it's a trail. Like I say, there again, it's a water resource, water, wildlife habitat, so on and so forth. So the canal's never really gone out of business, it's just evolved into a different purpose.
Okay. Please explain what caused the death of canal in Miami or Miami Erie Canal.
Well, first of all, the canal, again, has never gone out of business.
Right.
It's just evolved. But when the canals were first developed, it was a large investment for the state and the federal government to build. So, in its busiest time, its highest receipts was in 1851. And after that, the railroad was starting to come into play. It was starting to be a little bit more of a competition. And so receipts for the canal system started to wane, and the railroads were starting to be more profitable, okay, because the railroads could run 365 days out of the year, where the canal system would have to stop when the canal froze over and wait for the ice to break up in the spring. So things started to wane, and in 1909, 1910, there was a resurgence in interest in the Miami Erie Canal. And because those doggone railroads they had a monopoly on transportation, and they were charging way too much money to transport product. So there was an interest. So there was some money that went into rebuilding some of the locks and rebuilding some of the canal system. In 1913, we had this major flood, obviously, a historical flood, and that kind of destroyed a lot of the canal system and their structures. But what people don't realize is if you were up on the Laramie Summit, there were no structures on the Laramie Summit. So there was nothing there to be destroyed. Plus, Laramie Summit is 512 feet above the Ohio River, so the flooding didn't affect that area. There were areas that were not destroyed. The areas that were destroyed were basically down around Dayton and Cincinnati area. So they were on the lower end of where the water flow was. So they got the worst of the flooding. So, but locally here, like I say, we're still operational, basically because the flooding, we're on top of this hill, didn't destroy the structures like they did towards Dayton and Cincinnati area and up along Toledo.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still operational.
Okay, so how did the canal make money?
They first, there was tolls out there. So if you wanted to ship freight, there was a charge for shipping your wheat or grain or your livestock. And if you were a passenger, you had to pay the captain so much money to travel from point A to point B, and then he had to pay the tolls for that, okay? Cargo was the same thing. It always cost you, just like today, if you're going to be shipping by truck or whatever, or train, you're going to have to pay a toll for that. Well, same thing happened back then. So, and also, there was a speed limit on the canal. So the Miami Erie Canal speed limit was 4 miles an hour. If you got caught going too fast, you had to pay a fine. So I don't know how much of a source of funding what that was, but it was there.
Okay, so, what is your favorite spot on the canal in Always, County, and why?
My favorite spot in Always County, I would have to
On the
say,
canal.
what's
On
that?
the canal.
On the canal. My favorite spot on the canal is, 6 Mile Creek Aqueduct up to Kossuth. And the reason is, one is the historical structure there of 6 Mile Creek Aqueduct. So you have Miami Area Canal is about 18 feet above the surrounding ground there and above 6 Mile Creek. If you go north of that, about a mile, the canal is probably about 25 feet above the Prairie Creek. So it's like, how did they figure out how to build this canal from the original ground level up 25 feet so they can maintain a water level? And it's kind of removed off the road there, so you're kind of out in the middle of nowhere, so you don't have all the traffic and stuff like that, so it's very easy to just walk back there and just imagine yourself being back in the 1850s, and here comes a canal boat, and you're the hoagie that's helping drive the mule team, and down below is the original ground level, which is 25 feet away. It's very, very inspiring.
So, what do you know of as, longest, canal system near Always County?
As far as the hydraulics are concerned,
No, like longest, like in miles, or,
the whole, so in Auglaize County, the Miami Area Canal is still intact, the whole from end to end. And in that is that 3 mile feeder that we draw water out of Grand Lake St. Mary's to maintain the water level in the Miami Area Canal.
okay,
So it's still intact.
right. So,